So I'd like to thank the ASA for inviting us to speak with you today. We're going to talk to you a little bit about a program that Dr. Paul Weinberg, Dr. Ken Fries, myself, and Elizabeth Snyder worked on called the Anesthesia Refresher and Remediation Program. So what we want to do today for a little while is share with you a little bit about the shortages, the anesthesia staffing shortages that led to our thinking about this program, go over a little bit about some of the ACCME tenets concerning knowledge, competency, and skill, and finally define what we mean by competency-based program completion. So again, digging down one step further, we're going to talk a little bit about history and background, an overview of the program, and then some about competency-based program development. So the genesis for this program began about 1.5 years ago when Dr. Weinberg, Dr. Fries, and myself, along with Liz, realized that there were currently significant shortages across the healthcare professions, but particularly impacting anesthesiology. And we realized that there was a deficit across the space of about 35,000 clinicians. And although there was an estimated shortage of about 3,800 clinicians in 2011, fast forward about 10 years, and we know that that estimate now is much, much worse. We're about 12,500 down. Why is that? Well, training programs could only produce a certain number of trainees that graduate. Number two, we have an aging workforce, and we have clinicians that are working late career later, and end of career clinicians working past when they ideally would like to. With COVID, a lot of those people said, you know, I think a little bit older, I think that's about it. I think I'm going to retire. In front of that backdrop, we have demands due to the migration of cases from the hospital-based space to ambulatory, and in general, backlog from COVID, and then just the aging baby boomers are causing huge relative deficits from the demand that exists versus the supply we have. And it's important to realize that although we talk about a snapshot in time, if we drill down to the actual department level, what really happens? What happens is you have incomplete staffing. That leads to those people who are there working longer and harder. Those people get burned out. They said, I've had enough, and the situation worsens, it deteriorates. And that's sort of on a micro level what I think everybody has started to see in departments across the U.S. Well, what I just said about anesthesia could be true for any specialty, no matter which one. The American Board of Medical Specialties put out an APB for programs that were looking to remediate physicians who may have been out of the workforce and want to re-enter their chosen field. Our program, developed by Drs. Weinberg, Fries, myself, and Liz, and with the support of administration and the Dean of Academic Affairs, Dr. Yost at Nassau University Medical Center, took a look at 3 cohorts of anesthesiologists. One, clinicians who took time away off from medicine altogether. Maybe they got sick or a family member got sick. Maybe they had their hand in some business or what have you. But now they've decided they want to really get back into clinical medicine, and in particular hospital-based anesthesia. Number 2, we've been pretty much the last 20 or 25 years been really seeing growth of the ambulatory space. And some anesthesiologists have said, you know, I'd like to provide anesthesiology services, so maybe a pain doctor or a cataract center or an endo center. And now they fast forward and they want to go back into the hospital space. And a lot of those skills and those competencies and that knowledge that you had, the hospital space has gotten a little rusty. And finally, our third cohort are anesthesiologists who, through some state-mandated requirement, are being asked to go back and remediate or work in a supervised environment. And those are the 3 cohorts for our program. As we mentioned, it was at Nassau University Medical Center, which is a tertiary care 530-bed teaching hospital. It's a safety net hospital taking care of some of the most vulnerable patients in the U.S. It's been a teaching hospital for over 60 years. They do about 80,000 ED visits, about 80,000 outpatient specialty clinic visits, and there are about 12 operating rooms plus endo plus OB. The model there is physician CRNA and pretty much heavy on both. So I think one of the key takeaways we want everybody to know is that the program is multidisciplinary. Our view was that none of us are smarter than all of us. And we really tried to convene a coalition of people that had the wisdom and capability in specific areas to bring to bear their talents to develop the program. Now, mind you, this was a 1.5-year journey. This was not quick. One was Dr. Dean Yost, who was the Dean of Academic Affairs. Another was Maureen Hutchin, who was the administrator at the facility. We've already mentioned Drs. Weinberg and Fries, who were the beating heart behind this. But we were very fortunate and very blessed to have support and guidance and the wisdom that the American Society of Anesthesiologists provided through Susan Carlson and Dr. Joe Zokel, who gave us such great information along our journey so that we could develop a program that was durable and best of. And here our goal was to help our colleagues, to help our anesthesiology colleagues get back into practice. And I think with that goal in mind, the ASA and their wisdom was just invaluable and priceless. We also sought input and wisdom from the ACCME, the American College for Continuing Medical Education. And in fact, in our phone call with the ACCME, they gave us very specific advice about aspects of evaluations and how to further structure the program to embody their tenets as well. We spoke with the State Office of Professional Misconduct and had them review our materials. And we also spoke with the Medical State Society of New York, which is where the program was domiciled. Now, it might seem like that's a lot of people, but all of those people had a huge part to help play. And everybody's input individually made the collective result that much more better. So this is our timeline. And as we mentioned, Liz and I were reflecting on this the other day, is it's been a 1.5-year journey. It wasn't quick. And I think in terms of change management, one of the rules is go slow and go slower, because the faster you go, the less time you'll have to collaborate and work out the kinks. But this really started in June of 2020. We developed an executive summary, then a business plan. We started to think through the program duration, and we quickly realized that for these clinicians, for these anesthesiologists, that defining where these gaps were, gaps in knowledge, competency, and skill, was going to be paramount. Because no matter what cohort you came from, those gaps would vary. They would vary across knowledge, competency, and skill, and then within each of those categories, the subcategories, they would vary, and then the extent of those gaps would also vary. So we really worked hard from the outset to try to figure out how we could define gaps. And you'll see in a moment or two that those were on generation 4 of that, version 4, trying to figure that out. We figured out enrollee compensation. We decided early on that this was by and for anesthesiologists. We weren't inviting somebody to come and work for free. That's what it was about. Everybody's going to get paid, and get paid fairly and appropriately. If you want to come and get back into anesthesiology, one of the guiding principles that we wanted to move forward is this is really about you and making sure we're being fair to everybody. We put together a marketing plan. When you put together these programs, you have to study the hospital bylaws. That's your roadmap about what you can or can't do. Those are the rules of the road. We put together a program application and a credentialing application. We worked on delineation of privileges, which are complicated given the bylaws. We finalized the compensation. We identified applicants, and we began to contract with them. We actually accepted 2 or 3 candidates into the program, And where we are today, there's one thing that we still need to figure out, and we understand the strategic approach, we understand the tactical approach, and we're just figuring out how to get there. So the program structure is really, it's programmatic. We really based it on a lot of the best practices and requirements of the ACGME and then the tenets of the ACCME. And that way we had a mooring to those organizations that were real specialists in education. And we figured that mooring would keep us true to having best of class results. Everybody that wanted to apply to the program had to complete a residency, every one of them. And everybody that came into the program has to be board certified or is coming into the program because there's some part of their background that has let their board certification lapse or not be in effect. So we wanted to share the top 12 attributes of the program, the things that we've done along the way that we think define the program. We've already talked about the first one being moored to the ACCME and the ACGME. The other one was we tried to piggyback on something that was existing at the facility. So at this facility, they had existing programs for non-ACGME programs. So we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. There was a process, there was a procedure, there was a methodology, there was a website. So what we felt is that by taking what was there and developing it further and modifying that it would allow people to welcome the change more than if we had developed something brand new that people would have had a hard time getting their head around. And we took that same exact approach with the credentialing committee and the delineation of privileges. We've already talked about the requirements about being board certified or being board eligible. And another attribute that we really like a lot is, as you might imagine, everybody that comes into the program has their own journey, a pretty long story to tell. But how do you do that in a way that is fair for the applicant and not being overly burdensome? So what we developed was a two-part process. We developed a short form application with about 10 questions. And that form would then go to committee for the program. And then if the committee unanimously voted for them to be considered to enter the program, they would fill out a long form application. That long form of the application is about 40 pages long and ask questions that are fairly broad and fairly deep to ensure that we are a good fit for the candidate and they were a good fit for us. Everybody that came into the program had about 10 hours of interviews. Dr. Weinberg would interview them, Dr. Fries. I might interview them, Dean Yost, Maureen. The CEO of the hospital graciously agreed to interview everybody as well. That's how invested the hospital was in this, as did the chair of the credentialing committee. When I say 10 hours, I'm probably being conservative. It's probably a lot more. We mentioned that we used standard materials and embellished them for the program that the hospital had. Key, defining the gaps in knowledge, competency, and skill, defining individualized learning plans, and bringing to bear some of the things we've learned about best practices with adult learning. You know, some of us who are a little bit older in their career, we think of learning when there was a blackboard. Well, I don't think any place has a blackboard now. And similarly, when you go into the clinical realm, education has just vastly changed. And what we wanted to do is bring some of those positive changes to bear in the individual learning plans. The other thing we did is we required everybody to give us a one-year commitment. A one-year commitment. We think that that is required to expect that. Now, caveat. This program has competency-based progression and competency-based graduation from the program. So depending on your gaps, depending on the number of them and how severe they are, if you could finish the program and close your gaps sooner, that works. If you need to be there longer, that works. If you need more than about 18 months, we think you might want to think about going through a formal retraining program, because you're already 2/3 through a traditional anesthesiology residency program. So we're asking people to make a one-year commitment. We're trying to select people that we think will need that year, but we do realize that there might be people that have fewer and less severe gaps than others and are flexible on both the higher and lower end. And again, these positions are paid. So when we thought about our program, there were some operational things that might not seem apparent. What do you write on a badge? Or are you a trainee? Well, you finished a residency program together. Are you a student? No, you're not a student. You went to medical school, finished a residency, and finished your boards. I don't think so. But that's one of the things we had to think through. Well, how do you document this? How do you communicate that to a patient? Who's taking care of them and under what supervision? How do you explain that to surgeons and the nurses? How do you make it really clear what sort of things can be done independently and what things should happen under supervision? And then under supervision, which required less versus more supervision, and at what time would that occur? So how did we figure out these gaps? And I'll tell you, this is one of the things where humbly, I have to tell you, we stumbled across it. It's been about a year. We started out saying everybody will go to a simulation center. We'll get a nice report. We'll go to one of the commercial places that offer board exams, and that's how we're going to do it. But then when Liz and I started to investigate best practices for education, all tools that you use to define where learning gaps are or knowledge gaps are have to be validated. They have to be proven to be valid and reliable, or else you're going to create this individual learning plan off something that might not be reflective of where the gaps are. So we quickly abandoned number one because it was not a validated tool. Our next swing at that, we said, well, let's go to the ASA. They are wonderful. They've been so supportive. They're going to be the solution. And we looked at the ACE exam, we looked at the C exam, and we looked at the SimStat activities. And we were pretty moored to that because we thought that was the way to go. But we didn't take that for granted, and we actually spoke to the folks at the ASA to ask them if those tools were validated for the purposes of gap analysis, and if our learning curriculum could be developed based upon those results. And we learned that they were not. They were not assessment tools. And that if we started to base the individualized learning plan based on that, then we might get results that were not predictive of success in the program. So in version 3.0 of the gap analysis, we think we have what might be a solution. The ABA has 3 different exams. They have the basic exam, the advanced exam, and the applied exam. And because those are used for folks who are in training or that are preparing to become an anesthesiologist, those tools are, we believe, going to be much more predictive and helpful than the others. But with those exams, those are not meant for people that are board certified and finished a residency. So those tools, which we think might be very useful, at this point in time, they're really not able to be used for folks in the program. So where we are now is we're sort of on version 3, and if that is not something we could use, then we're tenacious and we're innovative. We'll find a way to get to the same result. But right now, this is where we are. And I don't want to leave out the 4th component, which is the ASA Center of Physician Leadership Excellence, the CPLE. And what they do is they interview anesthesiologists and they analyze some of the behavioral issues, and we've asked them to help us get our arms around this competency confidence question. Because if we have people that come into the program that have been out of it for a while, where's their confidence? Maybe their confidence is out of alignment with their competency. So we can't have that mismatch. So we wanted the ASA and the folks at the CPLE to help us figure out that rubric of competency and confidence and see where are they today, and as they go through the program, where they should be ending up when they're through it. So What are in the individualized learning plans? Stuff we've all heard about. Didactic lectures. We're very lucky. We have an educator in the department. Liz and I are pretty big wonks when it comes to education, so we try to lend a hand and help. It's external readings involving themselves in intra and extra departmental meetings, PBLD or problem-based learning discussions, one-on-one sessions. It's a hands-on program. You're in the OR working with patients. Importantly, all of those activities will be advanced based upon competency, and then completion with the program, again, will be based upon competency. So, as I mentioned before, every person in the program will have their own individualized learning plan. And in working with the ACCME, any activity that people go through while they're in the program, we will be fashioning so they meet or exceed the ACCME requirements. We don't know if they'll get 10, 100, or 1,000 CME credits, but it's going to probably be a lot because it's a one-year program, and it's a pretty big investment, so we would expect it to be a lot. And we do want to thank the ACCME for bringing quite a bit of feedback to us, just like the ASA, on how we fashion the program. So how do you conceptualize this? It's not a training program, but it's more than a mentoring, or, how do you think about this? And Dr. Weinberg had a really good way he explained it to me. You have to think like we're taking the CA 1, 2, and 3 and we're condensing that into a year. We're not going to cover everything. We're going to cover where those gaps are, but that's what we're going to do. And as we explain it to people, that's a lot of times the way we explain it, right? If it's an OR nurse or a surgeon, somebody might be at that CA 1 level, but they might be at CA 3 late. It's going to depend on as they go through the program. How about supervision? Again, this is going to be sort of a hybrid, somewhere between an ACGME 1-to-1 advancing to 1-to-2, versus a medically directed CRNA model, which is 1-to-1, 1-to-4. And this is just meant to share with you how we conceptualize it, is that the enrollees in the program will be starting out 1-to-1 and then advancing to 1-to-2. They'll never have more than 2 enrollees with 1 attending, thereby meeting the requirements as set forth by the ACGME as well. So, conceptualize the learning, which is really what this is about. We broke them up into 3 buckets: knowledge, competency, skill. We thought, hey, advancing people's knowledge, competency, skill, that's not new. Lasers, regional anesthesia, ultrasound. All of us who are anesthesiologists always try to advance that, and we do it every day. We know that the skills we learn, whether it's opening up your laryngoscope blade, whether it's approaching the IJ, whether it's placing the needle in just the right way for insertion of an IV, all of that is muscle memory. We all developed it, we all have it, we just got to get it back. It takes a little time. We think that our program, can be thought of as a proctoring program in many respects, but it's much more than that. You could think of it as a FPPE based upon the gaps that we have identified, along with an IPPE, or an initial physician practice evaluation. That's another way to think about it. And if the Joint Commission came by and had questions, we'd probably present it to them just like that, because that's sort of their parlance. So this is something that we are going to pay a lot of attention to, and it's really interesting. We've interviewed probably 25 or 30 people. We've selected 2 or 3 people already, but they fell into 2 buckets. People who had an enormous amount of self-confidence, and that's surprising. Physicians that are really confident, but they hadn't practiced anesthesia in a while. And Dr. Fries and Weinberg and Liz and myself, we said, how could they be so confident when they haven't picked up a laryngoscope in 10 years? And you could fill in those terms with other things. And I would say that was about half of the people that inquired about the program, maybe 2/3. We felt as though the confidence and the competence were not aligned, and we saw that as being problematic on a go-forward basis. Because when you're in the OR, that's going to manifest as saying, I don't need supervision. Oops, I just hit the carotid. Or oops, something happened, and we don't want to have many of those oops moments. We really were targeting the low confidence, low competence, the alignment, where the competence and the confidence were pretty well aligned. And the 2 people we've already accepted into the program and the 3rd that's in process all fell into that category. Now, we've done this ourselves using just, I guess, life's lessons to figure that out, but we're really hoping to work with the ASA CPLE to help put data behind that so we can quantify that confidence and competence equation. So, for instance, if we have the basic exam and we have the advanced exam and the applied exam data and we have the CPLE data, now we could really start to create a Punnett square of where they're going to be and really target people in just the right way. Not because we want to exclude people, but we want people to come into the program we believe will be successful. So I think we've covered this. The OR staff, how we presented this to the nurses and the surgeons and the OR staff, just think of it as a condensed sort of residency program. And faculty. We're lucky. At Nassau University Medical Center, many people in the department are very familiar working with residents. We have oral maxillofacial residents rotating through. We have EMTs. We have learners in the program. So we're really lucky. We have faculty there already. But we do realize that some people who want to be faculty might not have that faculty experience. So for 2022, we're going to be putting together learning modules for people who want to become faculty. So if they'd like, they could broaden and deepen their knowledge. So for people who want to be involved in the program within our department, there's research opportunities, there's committee participation. A lot of the committees will seem very familiar to you. They're part of the ACGME committee structure. They could serve as mentors or they could serve as faculty. So in summary, and concluding today's presentation, sharing with you a little bit about our anesthesiology refresher and remediation program. It's only for people that completed a residency, are board certified, or otherwise they're in the program because of the need to do something to either get back that board certification or get that board certification. We used existing governance systems and processes. It was a highly collaborative, multidisciplinary project that we intentionally went slowly with, about 1.5 years. Right now, as I mentioned, we have 3 applicants that we have decided to go forward with out of about 30, maybe more. 2 of them have already accepted. 1 of them is in process. And we're hoping to have 1 enrollee join us each quarter for 2022. And we haven't thought through 2023. So in summary, thank you for learning a little bit more about our program, and a big shout out and thank you to the ASA, Susan and Dr. Zokel, to Drs. Weinberg and Drs. Fries, who are the beating heart behind this, as well as to Liz Snyder, who collectively and individually really have made this happen. I'll conclude and see if anybody has any questions.